The night was cold on the human colony world. Lights from the houses glowed softly, but the streets were empty. Only one figure walked slowly through the darkness. She was an alien widow, tall, thin, her eyes sunken from hunger. Her clothes were torn, her steps heavy. She had once lived with pride among her people, but the war had taken everything. Her mate had died in the flames of battle, her home destroyed, her future stolen. Now she wandered, unwanted and forgotten, searching for scraps of food. Everywhere she went, doors closed in her face. Humans feared. Her whispered behind her back. Some spat on the ground when she passed, others laughed, calling her beast and enemy. She kept her head low, too weak to fight back. Hunger gnawed at her belly, her throat dry. She thought she would not survive another night. Her heart was empty, her hope gone. She believed no one in the galaxy would ever show her kindness again, but fate had a strange way of working. On that cold night, as she leaned against a broken wall, she heard a small voice. "Are you hungry?" She looked down, and there stood a little human girl no more than 7 years old. The girl's eyes were wide, her cheeks pink from the cold. In her tiny hands, she held a piece of bread, warm and soft. The widow blinked, certain it was a trick. "Humans did not give food to aliens, humans only took," she whispered, her voice dry. "Why are you giving me this?" The girl simply smiled. "Because you look sad." The widow's chest ached. She wanted to turn away, but her body trembled. Slowly, with shaking hands, she took the bread. The smell alone almost broke her. She bit into it, and tears burned her eyes. It was the first real food she had tasted in days. The girl clapped her hands, happy. "See, you like it." The alien widow nodded, unable to speak. Her throat was too tight with emotion. Then the child leaned closer and whispered something, so strange, so shocking. Words that made the widow freeze in place. "Marry my dad and you'll never be hungry again." For a moment, silence fell over the street. The widow stared at the girl, confused. She thought she had heard wrong, but the child only looked back with serious eyes. She was not joking. Her voice carried no laughter, only honesty. The widow's mind spun. What did this mean? Was this child offering her safety, a home? Or was it some cruel human joke to trap her? Her heart beat fast. The galaxy had taught her that humans could not be trusted. She remembered the war, the fire, the screams. She remembered human soldiers tearing through her world. Could she believe that this small child was different? Yet the bread in her hand was real. The kindness in the girl's eyes was real. Her own hunger was real. And in that hunger she felt a spark of something she had not felt in a long time. Hope, but fear whispered in her mind. If she followed this child, what would she find? Would she be betrayed? Would she be caged like an animal? She had nothing left. No family, no allies. Only her broken heart and her starving body. Still, her feet would not move away. Something in the little girl's words chained her to that spot. The child reached out, tugging at her torn sleeve. "Come, my dad will help you." The widow shook her head slowly. "No, humans do not help my kind." The girl's eyes narrowed in stubbornness. "My dad is not like other humans." The alien blinked, surprised at the fire in the small voice. The child was fearless, determined. It reminded her of how her own daughter once was. Before the war had taken her away, a sharp pain cut through the widow's chest. She closed her eyes, breathing shakily. This was dangerous, far too dangerous. And yet, what did she have to lose? The cold would kill her by morning. Hunger would finish what grief had started. But here was a child offering something impossible. A warm meal. Maybe even a place to rest. The widow opened her eyes. The little girl was still waiting. Still holding her sleeve with tiny hands. The alien nodded once, her voice trembling. "Show me." The girl smiled brightly and pulled her toward the light of a small house down the street. The widow followed, each step heavy with fear, yet pulled forward by something stronger than fear. Somewhere deep inside, a question burned. Was this the beginning of a cruel trap? Or the first step toward a life she had thought lost forever? The alien widow followed the small human child through the narrow street. Her feet dragged with doubt, but the child pulled with surprising strength. The night air was sharp, and the stars above looked distant, cold in her mind. The widow repeated the girl's words again and again. "Marry my dad and you'll never be hungry again." It made no sense. It had to be madness. Yet still, she walked. They reached a small house at the edge of the colony. The walls were patched, the door old, the windows glowing faintly with yellow light. The girl grinned and whispered, "This is my home." She pushed the door open, the smell of warm food spilled out, filling the widow's lungs with fire and longing. For a moment, her body almost betrayed her. She wanted to rush inside, sit by the fire, eat until her stomach no longer hurt. But fear stopped her at the threshold. She had been tricked before, lured into false safety. Could she trust this little one? The girl looked back and frowned. "Come in." The widow shook her head, whispering, "I cannot, your father will hate me." But the child only smiled in that stubborn way. "My dad is different, you'll see." And before the widow could protest, the girl shouted into the house, "Dad, I brought someone." The widow froze, her heart thundering. From the shadows of the kitchen, a tall human man stepped out. His hair was dark and messy, his clothes worn, his face tired. He stopped at the sight of the alien standing at his door. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavy, like the pause before a storm. The widow's legs trembled, she thought of running. But hunger rooted her in place. Her eyes darted to the table inside. There was bread, steaming stew, the scent of meat and herbs. Her stomach growled loudly, betraying her need. The man's eyes narrowed, suspicious. "What is this?" he asked his daughter, his voice low. The child puffed up proudly. "She's hungry, she has no one, she needs us." The man's gaze moved back to the widow. She lowered her eyes, shame burning her cheeks. "I did not mean to intrude," she whispered, her voice thin. "I will go." But before she could turn, the girl grabbed her hand tightly. "No, Dad. She stays. She needs a family." The words struck like thunder in the widow's heart. Family, a word that felt too painful, too far away. The man sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You can't just bring strangers into the house, especially not—" He stopped himself, but the widow knew the word he wanted to say. "Alien." The girl frowned, stubborn. "She's not a stranger. She's like us. She lost everything." Her voice cracked slightly, but she held strong. The man's eyes softened, though his face was still hard. He looked at his daughter for a long moment, then at the widow again. "Sit," he said at last, his tone heavy, cautious. The widow hesitated, unsure if it was a command or a trap. The girl tugged her arm, pulling her inside. The warmth of the house wrapped around her like a blanket. Her body shook not just from cold but from the sudden shock of comfort. She sat carefully at the edge of a chair, her back straight, her hands tight in her lap. The stew on the table steamed, the smell almost unbearable in its richness. The man placed a bowl in front of her without a word. The widow looked at it, then at him, confused. "Eat," he said simply. Her throat tightened. "Why?" she whispered. He didn't answer, but his daughter did, leaning close with a wide smile. "Because you're going to marry my dad." The widow choked on air, staring at the child in disbelief. Her hands shook, the spoon rattled against the bowl. The man coughed, almost spilling his own drink. "What did you just say?" The girl looked proud. "She needs food, she needs love, you need a wife, so it's perfect." The room fell into silence. The widow's mind spun, her chest tight. This could not be real. This had to be a cruel joke. But the little girl's eyes were bright, her smile pure. There was no cruelty in her face, only hope. The man rubbed his face with his hand, muttering, You can't say things like that." But the girl ignored him, turning back to the widow. "Don't worry, I'll make him say yes." The widow's breath caught, torn between laughter and tears. No one had ever fought for her since the war. No one had ever said she deserved to belong. She lifted the spoon, her hands shaking. The stew was rich, hot, filling. Every bite felt like fire and memory. She could not stop the tears that slipped down her cheeks. The girl reached over and wiped them away with tiny fingers. "See? You're safe now," she whispered. The widow wanted to believe it, wanted so badly, but her heart whispered warnings. Humans had destroyed her world. How could she ever be safe with them? Still, she stayed in the chair, eating slowly. The man sat across, silent, watching her carefully. His eyes were not cruel, but they were filled with questions. She lowered her head, afraid of what he might ask. But deep inside, something dangerous stirred. A fragile seed of hope, planted by a fearless little girl. The alien widow stayed in the small human house, but she never felt safe. Every morning she woke before the sun, her ears sharp, listening for danger. The warmth of the fire, the smell of bread, the soft blanket on the chair, none of it could erase the shadows in her mind. She had lived through betrayal before, and she knew kindness could turn into cruelty in a heartbeat. The little girl followed her everywhere, holding her hand, showing her drawings, asking questions. She called her mom when her father was not listening. The word pierced the widow's heart, both joy and pain. Once, long ago, her own daughter had used that word, but the war had stolen the child away, leaving only an empty ache. Now this human child filled that silence with laughter. It was sweet, but it was also dangerous. If she grew too close, the loss would destroy her again. The father kept his distance. He spoke little, his eyes always watching, measuring. At the table, he would sit across from her, his jaw tight. Sometimes he looked at her like a guest, sometimes like a burden. She could not read him, and that frightened her more than anger would have. She wondered if he waited for the right moment to send her away, or worse, to sell her to those who hunted aliens. Outside, the colony whispered. When she went with the little girl to the market, voices followed her. Why is she here? Doesn't he know what she is? Some neighbors crossed the street, avoiding them. Others muttered loud enough for her to hear. Her hands curled into fists. But she kept walking. She had promised herself she would not fight, not here, not with the child watching. But every word was a knife in her back. At night, she sat by the window, staring at the stars. The little girl would sneak out of bed and curl against her side. Whispering stories, the widow pretended to listen, but her mind was far away. She thought of escape, of slipping into the forest beyond the colony. It would be safer to leave before the humans turned on her. But every time she rose to pack her few things, the child would stir and cling to her sleeve. "Don't go, Mom," she would mumble in her sleep, and the widow's heart would break again. So she stayed, night after night, trapped by the chains of love and fear. One evening, as the father fixed a broken chair, he spoke at last. "You know this cannot last," he said quietly, without looking up. The widow's chest tightened. "I know," she whispered. The girl gasped from the floor where she was playing. "No, she stays forever." The man sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's not that simple." The widow lowered her eyes, shame and sorrow burning inside her. Perhaps tomorrow he would send her away. Perhaps this fragile peace was already over, but fate did not wait for tomorrow. That night, a stone struck the window with a sharp crack. The girl screamed, the father jumped to his feet, voices shouted from outside, angry, cruel. "Send her out! She doesn't belong here! She's one of them!" The widow froze, her body trembling. Her instincts screamed, run, hide, escape, but her legs would not move. The father rushed to the door, holding it shut as fists pounded from outside. The little girl clung to the widow, crying. "They'll hurt you," she sobbed. "Don't go out." The widow's chest ached with 1,000 memories of fire and blood. She wanted to flee, to protect herself, to vanish into the night. But the girl's arms around her waist anchored her in place. She looked to the father, expecting him to push her away. To hand her over, instead he stood tall, his back against the door. "No one touches her," he growled through clenched teeth. The pounding grew louder, the voices angrier. But he did not move. The widow's heart raced, stunned. He was shielding her. A human defending an alien. It was something she had never seen before. At last the shouts faded into the night. The neighbors left, though their hate remained. The house was quiet again, broken only by the little girl's sobs. The father turned, his face pale, his hands shaking, but his eyes were steady. "They won't stop," he said, his voice heavy. "They'll keep coming." The widow lowered her head, guilt crushing her chest. She whispered, "I should leave." But the little girl cried louder, "No, you can't leave, you are my mom." The man looked at them both, silent for a long time. Then he shook his head. "Not tonight," he said firmly. "You're safe here." The widow could not breathe. She had expected hate, betrayal, even death. But instead she had found something far more dangerous. A fragile thread of trust. A human who stood in front of her when the world demanded she be cast out. A child who called her mother, refusing to let go. It was terrifying. And it was beautiful. And deep inside, she knew her life would never be the same again. The next days were filled with silence and fear. The alien widow stayed inside the small house, her ears sharp for every sound outside. She could feel the hate of the neighbors pressing against the walls like a storm waiting to break. The father worked quietly, fixing small things, keeping busy, but his shoulders were tense. The little girl tried to smile and laugh, but even her innocent voice could not chase away the shadow that hung over the family. At night, the widow sat by the fire, staring at the flames. Every crack of wood made her flinch. Every step outside made her heart race. She had lived through battles before, but this was different. Here there were no armies, no shields, no orders, only a family standing alone against a crowd. And she feared that sooner or later the crowd would come again, louder, angrier. The little girl never wavered. She held the widow's hand in the market. She called her mom in whispers. She told her father again and again, "She belongs here with us." The man did not answer, but his silence was not rejection. It was the silence of a soldier thinking, weighing risks, preparing for something he could not yet speak of. The widow knew the look. She had seen it on her own people before battles. It chilled her blood. Then the attack came. It was a cold night, the sky clear, the stars sharp like knives. The widow was cleaning the small dishes when the first stone struck the wall. It hit with a loud crack, echoing through the house. The little girl jumped, spilling her toy across the floor. The father froze, his eyes narrowing. The widow felt her stomach twist. She had been waiting for this. Voices outside rose in anger. "Send her out. She doesn't belong here. She will bring trouble to us all." More stones flew, shattering against the windows, bouncing off the roof. The little girl cried and clung to the widow, her small hands shaking. The widow's heart pounded. Her instincts screamed at her to flee into the shadows. But the child's arms were chains. Keeping her rooted in place, the father stormed to the door, slamming it shut as fists began to pound on it. "Get her out," the crowd shouted. "She's a spy. She'll turn on you the moment you trust her." The widow's breath came fast, her chest heavy. Her whole body trembled with memory. She had heard those same words before on another world, before fire consumed everything she loved. It was happening again. She could not let this family burn for her. She stood, ready to step forward, to surrender herself to the mob, but the little girl clung tighter, screaming, "No, don't go." Her small voice was fierce, filled with tears. The father turned, his face set in hard lines. He stood tall before the door, his body between the family and the world. "No one touches her," he said, his voice like steel. The pounding on the door grew louder, but he did not move. The widow's throat closed. She had never seen such defiance. Not for her, not for someone like her. A human was standing for her when her own people had long abandoned her. The voices outside roared with fury. "You betray your own kind. You side with an enemy." The widow's knees weakened. Tears filled her eyes. She whispered, "Why? Why do you protect me?" But the man did not answer. He only braced himself harder against the door. The shouting went on for what felt like hours. The little girl cried until her voice broke. The widow wrapped her arms around the child, rocking her gently. Her heart burned with guilt and fear. This family was suffering because of her. She did not deserve this loyalty, this kindness. And yet she could not pull herself away. At last the crowd began to fade. Their anger did not die. It only retreated into the night. The father locked the door and leaned against it, his shoulders heavy. The house was broken with silence again. The little girl hiccuped, her face wet with tears. The widow stroked her hair gently, though her own hands shook. The father looked at them both, his eyes dark. "They will come again," he said simply. His voice carried no fear, only truth. The widow lowered her head, her voice soft. "Then I must leave." The little girl gasped, clutching the widow's sleeve. "No, you can't. You are my mom now." Her voice cracked, but her grip did not loosen. The widow's heart tore inside her chest. To leave would be to protect them. To stay would be to doom them. She looked to the father, searching for an answer, but he only shook his head slowly. "Not tonight," he said firmly. "Tonight you stay." His voice carried a final weight, not open for argument. The widow stared at him, her chest tight. She had expected betrayal, expected hate, but instead, she found a shield. For the first time since the war, she did not feel completely alone. The little girl smiled through her tears, whispering, "See? We are a family." The widow closed her eyes, her body trembling. It was dangerous to believe in such words, and yet, a fragile hope had begun to grow inside her, a hope stronger than fear. The days after the attack felt heavy. The widow moved quietly through the house, afraid of every shadow. She watched the door like a prisoner waiting for guards. Every time footsteps passed outside, her stomach tightened with fear. The little girl tried to cheer her with songs and drawings, but even her bright spirit could not erase the tension in the air. The father grew silent more than before. He repaired the broken window, replaced the cracked wood on the wall, and worked until his hands were raw. The widow saw him every night sitting by the fire, staring into the flames as if searching for something lost. He was not just a man protecting his daughter. He was carrying something deep in his chest, something heavy. The widow felt it, though he never spoke of it. One evening, when the girl was asleep, the widow finally asked, "Why did you protect me?" Her voice was soft, afraid of the answer. The man looked at her for a long moment, his face shadowed by the firelight. Then he spoke, his tone slow, rough. "Because once I failed to protect someone else." The widow's eyes narrowed, her heart beating faster. She did not speak, only waited. The man leaned back, his gaze far away. "I was a soldier during the war," he said. His voice cracked slightly, the words carrying the weight of old wounds. "I fought against your people. I believed they were monsters because that was what I was told." The widow's chest tightened. Her claws dug into her palms. Every instinct screamed to rise, to strike, to run. But his voice kept her still. "One day," he continued, "our unit attacked a village." His hands shook slightly as he spoke. It was not a base, it was not a stronghold. It was just families, children, elders, and still we were ordered to burn it down. The widow closed her eyes, pain stabbing. Her heart. She remembered villages too, her own people screaming as flames consumed them. Her throat tightened. Was he the reason she had lost everything? The man's voice grew low. "I tried to protect one woman, just one. She had a child with her. But my commander called me weak. He dragged me away. And when I returned, there was nothing left but ash." The fire crackled, filling the silence. The widow's claws loosened, her heart trembling. For a moment, she saw not a human soldier, but a broken man. A man haunted by the same ghosts that haunted her. "My wife," he whispered after a long pause, "was killed later in the war. By your people. Maybe not by you, but by someone wearing your colors." The widow's breath caught. He had lost too, just like her. The war had taken from both sides, leaving only grief. And now, two survivors sat across from each other, joined by pain, separated by blood. The silence stretched heavy between them. At last the widow spoke, her voice low. "I lost my mate in the war." The man looked up, his eyes tired, but soft. "I lost my daughter," she whispered, her chest shaking. She was small, like yours. She laughed like yours. Her voice cracked, tears burned her eyes. The man's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the chair until his knuckles turned white. They sat in silence, broken souls staring into firelight. The widow felt something shift in the air, fragile but real. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. It was something deeper. Understanding they were enemies shaped by the same wound. Two sides of a war that had stolen too much. The little girl stirred in her sleep and murmured, "Mom, Dad." Her voice soft, innocent, full of dreams. The widow froze, her heart aching. The man glanced at her, his lips pressed tight, but he did not correct the child. The widow felt her chest tighten with dangerous warmth. Could such a bond truly exist? Could two enemies share one family? But fear crept in quickly. She whispered, "If your people know the truth, they will destroy you." The man nodded. "I know." The widow lowered her eyes. "Then I must leave before it happens." "You are." Little girl stirred again, this time waking, her eyes wide. "No," she cried. "You can't leave. You are my mom now." She ran and hugged the widow tightly. Tears filled the widow's eyes, her arms wrapping around the child without thought. Her heart screamed with conflict. Leave to protect them, or stay and risk everything. The man's voice was calm but firm. "Leaving will not stop them. They already hate me for letting you in." He looked at the widow, his eyes steady. "So if we fall together." The widow's chest shook. She could not breathe. This man, who once had been her enemy, was choosing to share her fate. Her claws trembled against the child's small back. She whispered to herself, half in fear, half in wonder, "Is this what family means?" The little girl pulled back, smiling through tears. "Yes," she said firmly. "This is family." And for the first time in many years, the widow let herself believe it, even if just for one fragile moment. But deep inside, she knew the danger was not gone. It was growing, waiting, and soon they would all be tested in ways they could not yet imagine. The knock came at dawn. It was not the wild pounding of angry neighbors this time, but something heavier, colder, the kind of knock that carried authority. The widow's heart froze at the sound. The father rose from his chair slowly, his jaw tight. The little girl clung to the widow's sleeve, whispering, "Don't open it, Dad." But the door opened anyway. Two men stood outside, dressed in the dark uniforms of the colony watch. Behind them, more figures waited, weapons slung across their shoulders. The widow's chest tightened. This was no mob. This was the law. The leader stepped forward, his eyes hard. "We know she is inside," he said, his voice flat. "The alien widow, bring her out." The father stood firm in the doorway, blocking their view. "She is no threat," he said quietly. "Leave us be." The officer's lip curled. "No threat? She is the enemy, a survivor of the war, and now she hides under your roof. Do you know what that makes you?" The father did not move. His silence was its own answer. The widow's claws dug into her palms as fear coursed through her. She wanted to step forward, to end this before it grew worse. But the little girl's arms wrapped around her waist. Holding her in place, the officer sneered. "We are not here to argue, hand her over, and the Colony Council will forgive your mistake. You will be rewarded for loyalty to your kind." The father's eyes narrowed, but his voice was calm. "And if I refuse?" The officer's smile was sharp and cruel. "Then you will be marked as a traitor, your home seized, your child taken from you. Is that what you want?" The little girl gasped, her grip tightening on the widow. Her small voice trembled. "Dad, please don't let them take her." The widow's heart broke at the sound. She could not let this family suffer because of her. She stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. "Take me, I will go." The girl cried out, "No," and buried her face in the widow's torn clothes. The father turned sharply, his eyes flashing. "No," he said, his voice iron. "You will not take her." The officers stiffened, their hands brushing their weapons. The air grew heavy, the kind of silence that comes before violence. The widow's body shook, torn between terror and disbelief. This man who once called her enemy was now standing against his own kind for her. Her chest ached with something she could not name, something dangerous. The leader spat on the ground. "You are a fool, human. She will betray you the moment she sees an opening. They always do." The father did not blink, his voice low. "Then I will face it when it comes, but I will not hand her over." The officer's face twisted with rage. "You doom yourself and your child," he snarled. But the father stood unmoving, his body a wall between his family and the soldiers. The widow felt tears burn her eyes. She whispered, "Why? Why do you risk everything for me?" The father's eyes softened just for a moment. "Because I lost everything once," he said. "I will not lose it again. Not when my daughter has chosen you." The words hit her like a blade and a balm. At once she had been chosen, not as an enemy, not as a stranger, but as family. The little girl lifted her head, her voice fierce. "She is my mom now, and if you take her, you'll have to take me too." The officers faltered, staring at the child for a moment. Silence stretched again. Then the leader growled, "This is not over, we will return." With that, he turned sharply, the soldiers following him into the cold morning light. The door closed, the lock turned. Inside, the house was silent except for the sound of the girl's sobs. The widow knelt, holding her close, her own body trembling. She whispered, "I should go. I cannot let you suffer because of me." But the father shook his head, his voice steady. "You are already part of this house. Leaving will change nothing. They will hunt us anyway." His eyes met hers, calm and unwavering. "So we face it together." The widow's throat closed, her vision blurred. For so long she had lived alone, hunted, hated, unwanted. Now, against all reason, a human family was choosing her. Her fear was still there, sharp and real. But something else had begun to grow stronger than fear, something that felt almost like love. That night she sat awake by the fire. The little girl slept curled against her, safe and warm. The father sat across from her, silent, but his presence steady. The widow watched the flames dance and thought of the choice he had made. He had turned his back on his people, his law, his safety, all for her. Her claws trembled against the child's small hand. Her heart whispered that she did not deserve it. But another voice, quiet and fragile, whispered something new. Maybe she did. She looked at the man across the fire. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future not of running, but of staying, not of hunger, but of family. And though the world outside hated her, inside this small house she had found something the war could never destroy: loyalty, trust, and perhaps the beginning of love. The days after the soldiers left were heavy with silence. The widow lived in constant fear, waiting for the sound of boots outside the door. Every creak of the wooden floor, every whisper of wind against the window made her heart jump. But the little girl's laughter filled the house, refusing to let the darkness take over completely, and the father's steady presence was a wall against despair. The widow began to see small changes. The father no longer watched her with suspicion in his eyes. Instead, when their hands brushed by accident, he did not pull away. When the little girl called her Mom, he no longer corrected her. In the quiet of the evenings, they shared stories. She spoke of her world, the forests of silver trees and rivers that glowed under starlight. He spoke of his battles, his regrets, and the dreams he once had before the war. They were different, yet their pain was the same. And slowly, from pain grew understanding, but the world outside did not forget. One morning, hateful words were carved into the door: alien filth. The widow trembled when she saw it, her claws digging into the wood as she tried to scratch it away. The father stopped her gently, placing his hand over hers. They want to scare us, he said, his voice calm. But we do not give them what they want. The widow looked into his eyes and saw strength, not just for himself but for her too. And for the first time she believed they could survive. The little girl was the heart of their fragile home. She held their hands together when silence grew heavy. She made them sit at the same table, eat from the same bowl, laugh at the same silly jokes. In her young mind there was no war, no enemy, only family. And through her, the widow began to remember what it felt like to belong. Sometimes she caught herself smiling without meaning to. Sometimes she dreamed not of ashes and loss, but of tomorrow. The pain was still there, sharp and deep, but it was no longer the only thing in her heart. One evening, the father spoke words that shook her. "I told the council no," he said simply. "They offered me reward if I handed you over, but I refused." The widow stared at him, unable to speak. Her mind spun. He had thrown away safety, wealth, and peace, all because of her. Her voice trembled. "Why would you risk so much?" He looked at the little girl who was fast asleep in the corner and then back at her. "Because she chose you," he said, "and because I did too." The widow's chest ached. Tears blurred her vision. She had lived so long believing she was unworthy of love. Now here was a human man, once her enemy, declaring her family. It was terrifying, and yet it warmed her heart like nothing else could. But the test was not over. The soldiers returned, one final time, marching through the colony with orders to seize the house. The neighbors gathered, whispering, waiting to see the end of the strange family. The widow stood trembling, ready to give herself up. But before she could move, the little girl stood in front of her, tiny but fierce. "This is my mom," she shouted, her voice echoing across the crowd. The soldiers faltered, surprised. The father stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. "She stays with me, with us. She is part of this family, and nothing you say will change it." The silence stretched long and heavy. The neighbors shifted uneasily. The soldiers exchanged glances. Something about the scene, a soldier defying orders, a child defending an alien with pure love, was stronger than any command. At last, the officer growled in frustration. "Fine," he spat, "but don't expect mercy when the council turns on you." With that, they turned and left. The crowd scattered slowly, muttering, but none dared to attack, and in that fragile silence, a victory was won. Inside the house, the little girl clung to the widow, smiling through tears. "See, we are safe now," she whispered. The widow hugged her tight, her chest shaking with relief. The father placed his hand gently on her shoulder, steady and strong. And for the first time since the war, the widow let herself breathe freely. That night, she sat by the fire, the child asleep against her. The father sat across from her, quiet as always, but his eyes softer than she had ever seen. For a long time they said nothing. Then she whispered, "Thank you." His lips curved into the smallest smile. "We thank each other now, that is what family does." The widow's eyes closed, her heart full. She had once been only a hungry stranger, a widow with nothing but grief. Now she was more, a mother again, a partner again, a soul no longer alone. The war had taken much, but it had not taken everything. Here in this small house with a human man and his stubborn daughter, she had found something greater than survival. She had found love, belonging, and a new beginning.